She spent 7 years dressing the most powerful women in Seoul, and not one of them knew her name. Every stitch, every drape, every gown that made editors gasp and cameras flash, all of it hers, none of it credited to her. She was the ghost behind the label, the hands nobody thanked, the talent nobody saw. Until the night she walked into the wrong party, in the wrong clothes, surrounded by the wrong people. And the most dangerous man in Seoul looked straight at her like she was the only real thing in the room. This is her story. If this is your kind of story, hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The gown arrived at Kang Jun-Seo's private estate on a Tuesday morning, packed in a black garment bag with no logo on the outside and no name on the inside tag, which was exactly the problem. Amara Brooks noticed the missing tag the moment the courier handed the bag back to her outside the delivery entrance. She'd sewn that tag herself the night before. White satin ribbon, hand-stitched in silver thread. Maison Véronique, Seoul. She'd pressed it into the lining at 1:47 in the morning, while Véronique Choi stood behind her drinking wine and talking about the editorial spread she was planning to pitch to Vogue Korea. Now the tag was gone. Amara stood in the cold morning air with the garment bag in both hands and stared at the seam where the tag should have been. She didn't say anything. She just breathed through her nose, slow and controlled, the way she'd taught herself to breathe in situations where screaming wasn't an option. Behind her, the driver of the company van was already pulling away from the curb. She hadn't been told to wait for a ride back. That wasn't unusual. She re-zipped the bag, smoothed the front of her coat, and pressed the buzzer beside the service entrance for the second time. The estate was set back from the road behind a wall of pale granite that ran the length of an entire city block in Seongbuk-dong. Old money neighborhood. Old trees. The kind of quiet that didn't exist naturally in Seoul. It was purchased and maintained like everything else in places like this. She could see the upper floors of the main house over the top of the wall. Stone and glass and clean architectural lines that said someone with taste had spent serious money making sure it didn't look like they were trying. The buzzer crackled. A woman's voice, cool and professional. Yes? Amara Brooks. I'm here with the Maison Véronique delivery, the fitting appointment for Madame Kang. A pause. Then, you're early. Yes, I apologize. I wanted to allow time in case any last-minute adjustments were needed. Another pause, longer. Then the gate clicked and swung inward. The path to the service entrance cut around the side of the main house through a garden that was mostly bare in November, the trees stripped down to their bones. Amara walked it quickly, the garment bag over one arm, her kit bag on her shoulder. She was wearing her work clothes, slim black trousers, a fitted gray blazer, low heels that she could actually stand in for 6 hours. Her hair was pulled back. She wore no jewelry except the small gold studs in her ears that her mother had sent from Chicago 3 Christmases ago in a padded envelope, along with a card that said, "You were always meant for big things, baby." Amara kept the card in her kit bag. She didn't know why. It wasn't a good luck charm. It was more like evidence. Of what, she hadn't decided yet. A young woman in a dark uniform met her at the service door and led her through a back corridor into a room that had clearly been set up as a temporary fitting space. Full-length mirror, a portable dress form already adjusted to Madame Kang's measurements, good lighting overhead. Someone had thought about this. Someone had done it right. Amara unzipped the garment bag and lifted the gown free. Even she stopped for a second. She'd been living inside this dress for 11 weeks. She'd drawn the initial sketch on a cocktail napkin in a cafe in Hongdae at 9 in the morning after a night of barely 3 hours of sleep. She'd sourced the fabric herself, a silk organza from a small supplier in Busan that Véronique didn't know existed because Amara had never told her. She'd hand-beaded the upper bodice over the course of 4 separate nights while Véronique was at industry events. She'd rebuilt the back structure twice because the first version didn't move the way she wanted it to move. The dress was the color of deep water just before dark. Navy bleeding into violet, bleeding into the faintest trace of silver at the hem where the light caught the beads. It was formal without being stiff. It had weight, but it breathed. When you put it on, Amara knew, because she'd draped it over a dress form and walked around it for an hour in the studio at 2 in the morning. It made you look like a woman who didn't need anyone's approval. She'd designed it thinking about her own mother, actually. Not that she'd ever say that out loud. She was arranging the gown on the dress form when the door opened. Madame Kang Hye-rin was 71 years old and moved like a woman who had decided decades ago that hurrying was beneath her. She was small, maybe 5'2", with silver hair cut close to her head and a posture so correct it looked deliberate. She was wearing a silk robe over her clothes and reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, and she stopped in the doorway and looked at the gown for a long moment before she said anything. "Oh," she said quietly. That was all. Just that. But the way she said it made the young woman in the uniform take a small step backward. Madame Kang walked forward and stood in front of the dress form. She reached out and touched the beadwork at the shoulder, not grabbing, just grazing the surface with her fingertips the way you touch something you're not sure is real. "Who made this?" Amara opened her mouth, closed it. The answer she was supposed to give was already lined up and ready. Maison Veronique, Madame Kang. Miss Choi's studio has been working on this piece for the past 3 months, because that was the answer she always gave, the answer that kept her employed, the answer that kept her visa paperwork clean and her studio access intact, and the small wire transfers coming into her Korean bank account on the 1st of every month. Maison Veronique, Amara said. Miss Choi's atelier. I'm the head fitter. I'm here to make sure everything sits correctly for you. Madame Kang looked at her. Not the look of someone who was checking a fact. The look of someone who already knew the answer and was waiting to see which version you'd choose to give her. Head fitter, the old woman repeated. Yes, madam. Madame Kang studied her for another moment, then nodded once and set down her reading glasses on the side table. Let's see how it fits. The fitting took 45 minutes. Amara worked without talking much, which was her habit. She circled the old woman slowly, pinning what needed pinning, releasing what needed releasing. The waist needed a centimeter let out. She'd anticipated that, had left the seam allowance for exactly this reason. The hem was right. The back closure sat exactly where it should. The beading at the shoulder caught the light from the window and sent small fragments of it across the walls. Madame Kang was quiet during most of the process. She watched Amara in the mirror without appearing to watch her. The young staff member stood near the door and looked at her phone. You're American, Madame Kang said at one point. Not a question. Yes, from Chicago originally. How long have you been in Seoul? 7 years. The old woman made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. Do you like it here? Amara was on her knees adjusting the hem at the back. She thought about the question for a second longer than was probably appropriate. I like the work, she said. That's not what I asked. Amara sat back on her heels and looked up at the mirror. Madame Kang was watching her reflection. Some days I love it, Amara said. Some days I feel like a guest who's been here so long everyone forgot to ask if I actually wanted to stay. She didn't know why she said that. She hadn't planned to say anything close to that. Came out flat and honest, and she immediately wanted to put it back. But Madame Kang just nodded, like she'd filed the information away somewhere useful. The dress, the old woman said. Tell me about it. I'm sorry? The design. Tell me what you were thinking when you made it. Amara stood up slowly. She rolled her shoulders once, a private habit, a way of resetting. It's meant to move like water, she said carefully. The structure is rigid enough to hold its shape, but the outer layer is free. So when you walk, it follows you without dragging. The beadwork is heavier at the shoulder because I wanted the eye to go up, toward the face. She paused, toward the person wearing it, not the dress. Madame Kang was quiet. I wanted it to feel like a statement, Amara continued, quieter now. Not a performance. The old woman looked at her in the mirror for a long time. Miss Choi is very talented, she said finally. Yes, Amara said. She is. Neither of them said anything else. She was packing up her kit bag in the corridor outside the fitting room when she heard the footsteps, not the soft, quick steps of household staff. Something heavier, slower. Deliberate the way footsteps get when the person making them is used to having space cleared in front of them. Amara was crouching over her bag and didn't look up immediately, which meant that the first thing she registered about Kang Jun-Seo was his shoes, black, handmade, The kind of shoes that cost more than her monthly rent and had been polished that morning by someone whose job it was to do exactly that. She looked up. He was taller than she'd expected. She'd heard his name before. Everyone in certain circles in Seoul had heard his name, the way you heard about weather before it arrived. But she hadn't formed a clear picture. The picture she had now was mid-30s, broad through the shoulders, a face that was structured and still and gave away nothing. Dark suit, no tie. He had the look of a man who had recently made a decision he didn't particularly enjoy and was now simply carrying it. He was looking at her like she was something he hadn't expected to find in his own hallway. "You're from the atelier," he said. Not a question. His English was clean and direct, the kind that comes from education rather than exposure. Amara stood up. "Yes. I'm the head fitter for Maison Véronique. I was here for your mother's fitting." He looked past her at the closed door of the fitting room, then back at her. "The gown. It's finished. The final adjustments. Did you make it?" The question came out flat and simple and landed in the corridor like something dropped from a height. Amara felt the back of her neck go warm. "I'm sorry?" "The gown." He wasn't impatient. He was just precise. "Did you design it?" She had a script for this. She had given this speech or versions of it probably 80 times over 7 years. "I'm part of a talented team. Ms. Choi leads the creative vision. My role is execution and fitting." She could say it in Korean or English, could deliver it with a smile that looked genuine because she had practiced that smile until the muscles around her mouth knew the shape without being asked. She looked at him. He was watching her with the particular attention of someone who was used to people lying to him and had gotten very good at knowing when they were about to do it. "I work for Ms. Choi," Amara said. He let a moment pass. "That's not what I asked." She picked up her kit bag and settled the strap on her shoulder. "I should be getting back. Thank you for having me." The beadwork on the shoulder. He said it like he was reading from notes. "The pattern is weighted heavier on the left side than the right. Most designers do it symmetrically. This isn't symmetrical, and it's not accidental. Someone made a choice." He paused. "Ms. Choi's recent work is symmetrical. I've seen her last 3 collections." Amara stared at him. "I pay attention to things," he said simply. The corridor was very quiet. She could hear her own breathing. She was aware of exactly how still he was standing and exactly how still she was standing, and the fact that there was maybe 4 feet of polished floor between them. "I need to be getting back," she said. He stepped slightly to the side, not blocking her, just shifting his weight, and she walked past him toward the service exit. She did not look back. She was very careful not to look back. She was in the garden, on the stone path, before she let herself exhale. The company van wasn't waiting. She'd known it wouldn't be. She stood at the service gate for a moment and then pulled out her phone and called for a cab and stood in the thin November cold with her kit bag on her shoulder and the garment bag folded over her arm. Empty now, the gown left behind on its form, and tried to slow down whatever was happening inside her chest. He knew. That was the thought she couldn't get past. He knew, or he suspected strongly enough that the difference didn't matter. And he'd asked her directly, which meant he was either testing her or he was the kind of man who didn't see a reason to approach things sideways. Based on what she knew about Kang Jun-Seo, which was what everyone in Seoul's fashion-adjacent social world knew, which was that his family's legitimate business interests were substantial and his illegitimate ones were more substantial still. He was probably both. The cab arrived. She got in. The driver asked where she was going, and she gave him the address of the studio in Mapo-gu without thinking about it, out of habit, because that was where she went at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. She sat in the back and watched Seoul slide past the window. They passed through Seongbuk and dropped down toward the river, and the city thickened around her. The neon signs and the construction cranes and the delivery scooters and the office buildings with their banks of lit windows. And she felt the specific loneliness of someone who has been somewhere long enough to know the streets, but not long enough to be known by them. 7 years. She'd come here because she'd gotten a job offer from a Korean fashion group right out of school, a 2-year contract that had become a longer-term position at another house, and then another until she'd landed at Maison Véronique 3 years ago and found the thing she hadn't known she was looking for, which was Véronique Choi's creative infrastructure and Véronique Choi's client list and Véronique Choi's name on the door. The work was real. That had always been real. Amara had grown up watching her mother alter dresses in the back room of a dry cleaner in Pilsen and had understood fabric before she could name what she understood about it. She'd gotten a partial scholarship to a design school in New York and had worked 3 jobs to cover the rest and had graduated with a portfolio that her professors called technically exceptional and her classmates called quietly, a little resentfully, unfair. She had never been short of talent. She had been consistently short of credit. The cab stopped at a red light and she looked at her phone. No messages from Veronique. The fitting had gone fine. The gown was done. The client had been pleased. The job was complete. There was nothing Veronique needed from her that she hadn't already provided. There was never anything Veronique needed from her that she hadn't already provided. Amara put her phone face down on her knee and looked out the window. The studio occupied the top 2 floors of a narrow building in Mapogu that Veronique had converted 8 years ago, before the neighborhood got expensive. It smelled like fabric and coffee and the faint chemical sharpness of the dry cleaning solvent they used for delicate pieces. There were 3 workrooms and a small client salon at the front, and a private office that Veronique rarely used because she preferred to work from her apartment in Gangnam. Amara had a workstation in the largest room, second from the door, next to the window that looked out over the street. She'd hung 3 of her own sketches above the station, not credited, just framed, technically decorative, because she needed to see them while she worked. None of the other staff had ever asked whose drawings they were. Veronique had glanced at them once and said they had good energy. She dropped her bags and sat down and looked at the current project on her work table. A gown for the wife of a technology executive, pale gold silk, intricate seaming at the bodice. She'd started the pattern 2 weeks ago. The design was hers. It was always hers. Min-ji, the junior cutter, appeared in the doorway. She was 24 and deeply shy and had the best eye for proportion Amara had seen in someone that young. How was the Kang fitting? Fine. Went smoothly. Madam Kang is scary, Min-ji said conversationally. She's not scary. She just doesn't perform warmth. She doesn't feel. Min-ji considered this. What's the difference? One of those is a character flaw. The other one isn't. Min-ji nodded like she was logging the information for later and disappeared back to her station. Amara looked at the gold silk on her work table. She picked up her scissors. She set them down again. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it. She picked it up. The text was short. This is Kang Jun-Seo. My mother's birthday celebration is Saturday evening at the family estate. She would like you to attend. Dress code is formal. A car will be arranged. Please confirm by Thursday. Amara read it twice. Then she set the phone down on the work table very carefully, the way you set down something that might break. She sat there for a long moment with the gold silk in front of her and the sketches on the wall above her and the sounds of the studio around her, the hiss of the iron press in the next room, the low voices of the other staff, the distant traffic from the street below. Her phone buzzed again. Same number. She insisted. I'm passing on the message. Amara almost smiled. Almost. She picked up her scissors, found her mark on the silk, and began to cut. She didn't tell Veronique about the invitation. She wasn't sure why she made that choice. It wasn't strategy exactly. It wasn't fear. It was something quieter. A small, stubborn decision to keep one thing to herself for a change. The fitting had been hers. The dress had been hers. The moment in that corridor had been hers. She could let the rest of it go, the way she always let the rest of it go, but she was going to keep Saturday. She responded Thursday morning, confirmed, thank you. She spent Thursday afternoon trying to figure out what to wear. This was genuinely complicated because Amara's wardrobe for formal Seoul occasions was limited in a specific way. She could make things, obviously, and she owned several pieces that she'd constructed for herself over the years, but formal events at the kind of addresses Madame Kang lived at required a particular register. Not just elegant, old money elegant, the kind of dressing that looked effortless because it was so deeply considered. She was 3 hours into the problem when her phone rang, a number she did recognize, Kang Seo-yeon. She'd met Seo-yeon twice, both times at industry events where Veronique had brought her as staff adjacent. Seo-yeon was Jun-Seo's cousin, a fact she deployed in conversation frequently, and she moved through Seoul's fashion and society circles with the specific energy of someone who had decided early that being adjacent to power was the next best thing to having it. She was not particularly warm, but she wasn't openly hostile either. She was the kind of person who kept you at exactly the distance most useful to her. Amara picked up. "Hello? Amara." Seo-yeon's voice was smooth, a little too smooth. "I heard you're coming to Aunt Hye-rin's dinner Saturday." "Yes." Madame Kang was kind enough to invite me. Of course she was. She loved the gown. A small, gliding pause. "I'm calling because I want to make sure you're not stressed about the evening. These Kang family dinners, they look intimidating from the outside, but they're really very casual, family-focused, intimate. Nothing like what you might be imagining." Amara listened. "Honestly, it's just immediate family and a few close friends. Very low-key. Aunt Hye-rin prefers it that way for her personal celebrations. You'd be completely overdressed in anything formal, something comfortable. Smart casual, really. Jeans are totally fine. She genuinely hates when people make it into a production." Amara was quiet for a moment. "Smart casual," she repeated. "Exactly. You'll feel much more comfortable that way. Trust me, showing up in a gown when everyone else is in jeans would be so awkward. I'm telling you this as someone who knows the family." Another pause. "I just didn't want you to feel embarrassed." The word embarrassed sat in the air between them for a second. "Thank you," Amara said. "I appreciate you calling." "Of course. That's what we do, right? We look out for each other." The call ended. Amara sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment in Mapogu and looked at the pieces of fabric she'd pulled out for the evening. Her fingers were resting on the edge of a deep emerald silk she'd been saving for something. She'd cut the body of a gown from it 6 months ago and hadn't finished it, hadn't had the occasion. She thought about Seo-yeon's voice, how smooth it had been, how specifically helpful. She thought about the word embarrassed. She thought about the Song estate, the granite wall, the manicured winter garden, the entry corridor where Jun-Seo had looked at her and asked his flat, precise questions. She thought about Madame Kang touching the beadwork and saying, "Oh," in that quiet voice. She pulled the emerald silk into her lap. She had 3 days. She could finish it. She reached for her scissors and her pincushion and the small lamp she used for close work, and she settled herself on the bed with the fabric spread around her like something she was already inside. And she began. She was wrong, though. She didn't finish the gown. Friday came and went in a blur of client adjustments and a crisis involving a beading shipment that arrived in the wrong color, and an argument with the supplier that Veronique was supposed to handle and didn't, which meant Amara handled it, which meant Amara was on the phone for an hour and a half, sorting out a problem that was not her problem and getting no credit for sorting it, which was the usual rhythm of things. She got home at 11 Friday night and looked at the unfinished emerald gown on the chair beside her bed and understood that she wasn't going to finish it in time. She stood there for a minute. Then she changed into her oldest work jeans, a fitted white blouse she'd tailored herself so it sat exactly right, and her good boots. She pressed the blouse carefully. She did her makeup with the same care she brought to fine work. Not heavy, just deliberate. She put on the gold studs from Chicago. She looked at herself in the mirror. Fine. She looked fine. She thought about calling Seo-yeon back and asking more questions. She decided not to. She went to bed. Saturday evening. The car Jun-Seo had arranged was a black sedan, quiet and expensive, and it collected her at 6:30 from the street in front of her building. The driver was professional and silent, and she appreciated both qualities. The drive to Seongbuk-dong took 20 minutes. The sky was clear, and the city had gone purple dark around the edges, and the lights were coming on across the Han River, and she sat in the back of the car with her hands folded in her lap, and thought about nothing particularly, the way she sometimes did before situations she'd decided to walk into without a full plan. The estate gates were open when they arrived. Not the service gate this time. The main gate, wrought iron between stone pillars, flanked by small lights. The drive curved up through the garden, less bare-looking at night, the trees lit from below, something almost theatrical about it, and curved again toward the front of the house. There were cars parked along the drive, expensive cars, plural. Amara looked at them. She felt the first pull of something in her stomach, The driver opened her door and she stepped out and heard it before she saw it. The sound of a gathering. Not intimate. Not low-key. The particular hum of a formal event. Voices layered over music, layered over the clink of glassware. Coming through the tall windows of the house and through the open double doors at the front, where a man in a dark jacket was taking coats. She stood on the stone steps and looked through those doors. Ballroom. Chandeliers. Women in gowns that cost more than her monthly salary. Men in suits that probably cost more than that. Diamonds catching light in every corner. Staff moving through the room with trays. A string quartet somewhere she couldn't see. 200 people, minimum. Smart casual. Amara stood on the steps in her jeans and white blouse and her good boots, with the cold November air moving past her shoulders, and she understood exactly what had happened. The understanding arrived clean and complete, without any of the stages people usually go through. The denial, the hope that she'd miscalculated. No. This was what it was. She'd been set up. The man at the door looked at her, not rudely, just with the very slight hesitation of someone processing something unexpected. She thought about leaving. She ran through the sequence. Turn around, get back in the car, go home, call it a misunderstanding, put it behind her. She was very good at putting things behind her. She had years of practice. Then she thought about the emerald gown on the chair beside her bed. She thought about 7 years of her name not being anywhere. She thought about Seo Yeon's voice. I just didn't want you to feel embarrassed. Amara Brooks straightened her spine, lifted her chin by exactly the amount required, and walked through the doors into the blazing light of the Kang family ballroom. The whispers started before she reached the second step inside. She heard them the way you hear weather, not individual words at first, just a change in the texture of the room, a shift in attention, eyes moving in her direction and then quickly, politely, sliding away. She kept walking, slowly, because she had learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do in a room full of people who wanted to watch you crumble was to hurry. She made it to the edge of the main floor and stopped beside a tall flower arrangement and looked across the room. She could feel the color rising in her face. She breathed through it. 1 breath, 2, 3. She found the neutral expression she kept for professional situations. Not a smile, not a frown, just a face. And she held it. Across the room, a cluster of women in gowns that probably ran to 7 figures were looking at her. Not subtly. One of them leaned toward another and said something behind her hand, and the other one laughed, the kind of laugh that was designed to be noticed. Amara looked straight ahead. She was aware that she was standing in $200,000 worth of room in jeans and a blouse, that every woman within 20 meters was in a formal gown, that people were staring, and that the staring was the point. That somewhere in this room Kang Jun-Seo was watching this happen and feeling satisfied with the arrangement. She breathed, and then the room shifted again, in a different way, a different kind of attention. Quieter, more concentrated, the way a room gets when someone with authority enters it. Amara turned her head toward the main entrance of the ballroom. Kang Jun-Seo walked in with his mother on his arm. Madame Kang was wearing the gown. Her gown. Under the chandeliers, the deep watercolor of it came alive. Navy bleeding into violet, bleeding into silver at the hem, and the beadwork at the shoulder catching light the way she'd designed it to catch light, sending small fragments of brightness across the walls and the faces of the people near her. Madame Kang walked into the room with her head up and that correct, deliberate posture, and she looked, there was no other word for it, she looked magnificent. Jun-Seo was scanning the room, methodically, the way a person scans a room when they're looking for something specific. His eyes found her. He stopped scanning. The room was still doing whatever the room was doing. The music, the voices, the quiet mockery of women with expensive drinks and too much time. But none of that registered anymore because Kang Jun-Seo was looking directly at Amara Brooks across the full length of his family's ballroom, and he wasn't looking at her jeans or her blouse or her boots. He was just looking at her. Then he said something quietly to his mother. Madame Kang glanced in Amara's direction. Something moved across the old woman's face. Not surprise. Something sharper than surprise. Jun-Seo began walking across the ballroom floor. The conversations nearest to him dropped off one by one as he moved through the room, the way sound gets absorbed by something large moving through water. People stepped aside without being asked. His path was direct and unhurried, and it led straight to the corner where Amara was standing beside the flower arrangement in her jeans and her white blouse. He stopped in front of her. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. "You came," he said. "I was invited," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "My cousin called you." It wasn't a question. She let the silence confirm it. Something crossed his face, brief, controlled, and completely cold. Then it was gone. "Come with me," he said. "I'm fine where I am." "I know." He didn't move. "Come with me anyway." Amara looked at him. Then she looked at the room, at the women who were watching, at the stares that had followed her since she walked in, at the specific texture of public humiliation that she knew she was standing in the middle of. She looked back at him. "Okay," she said. He offered his arm. She didn't take it, but she fell into step beside him, and they walked together toward the far end of the ballroom and through the tall glass doors that opened onto the private terrace, and behind them, the room erupted into the kind of whispers that travel fast and mean everything. The doors closed. Cold air. The Seoul skyline burning in every direction, the Han River a dark ribbon through the center of it, bridges lit like thread pulled tight. The terrace was empty. The noise from the party was muffled now, distant, like something happening in another story. Amara walked to the railing and put both hands on it and looked out at the city. Jun-Seo stood beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "The tag was removed," she said finally. "From the gown. I sewed it in myself and it was removed before delivery." "I know." She turned to look at him. "How?" "Because it's the 4th time it's happened with pieces from that atelier in the last 18 months. I keep track of things that involve my family." He looked out at the city. "I noticed the discrepancy between Ms. Choi's documented aesthetic and the piece my mother received. I asked questions. I found out about you. She absorbed that. You investigated me. I looked into the work." A pause. "The work led to you." The city blazed below them. Amara gripped the railing and felt the cold metal through her palms and thought about 7 years. About 1:47 in the morning, and silver thread in a cocktail napkin sketch and silk from a supplier in Busan that Veronique didn't know existed. "You should go back to your party," she said. "It's my mother's party. She'll manage." He turned to face her more fully. "She wants to speak with you. She has something she'd like to say." "About the gown?" "About you." He paused. "About what happens next." Amara looked at him. The city was behind him, all that light, and his face was in shadow, but she could see his eyes clearly enough. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said slowly, "that my mother has opinions about talent and what happens to it when it isn't handled correctly. She has been known to act on those opinions." Something moved through Amara's chest. Not hope exactly. Something more careful than hope. "I still work for Ms. Choi," she said. "For now," he said. The terrace doors opened. Madame Kang stepped out, still wearing the gown, a glass of something in one hand. She looked at the two of them with an expression that was entirely unsurprised. "I've been looking for you," she said to Amara. "I have a proposal I'd like to make." She paused, studying the young woman's face. "I think you should hear it before you decide anything else about your evening." Amara looked at the old woman. She looked at the gown. Her gown, deep water dark under the terrace lights. She looked back at the city. 7 years. She breathed. "I'm listening," she said. And inside the ballroom, through the glass, she could just make out the shape of Kang Jun-Seo standing near the bar, champagne in hand, watching the terrace with an expression that had just started to change, from satisfaction into something it hadn't been a moment before. Something that looked very much like the beginning of fear. Madame Kang Hye-rin did not sit down when she came onto the terrace. She stood with her back to the city and her champagne glass held loosely at her side, and she looked at Amara the way she'd looked at the gown in the fitting room, not assessing, exactly, more like confirming something she'd already decided. "My son tells me you deflect well," she said. Amara glanced at Jun-Seo. He was leaning against the railing with his arms crossed, looking out at the river, giving no indication that he was part of this conversation or intended to be. "I answer questions honestly," Amara said. "You answer them carefully. That's different." Madame Kang took a small sip of her champagne. I've been in rooms with careful people my entire life. I married one. I raised one. A pause. Careful people survive, but surviving and living are not the same thing. The city hummed below them. Somewhere inside, the string quartet had shifted to something with more tempo. You designed the gown, Madame Kang said. Not a question, the same flat certainty her son used. Amara held the old woman's gaze. Yes. Every part of it. Yes. The fabric sourcing. Yes. The beadwork. Yes. Madame Kang nodded once slowly. How long has this been the arrangement? Your work, her name. Amara's jaw tightened slightly. 3 years at Maison Veronique. Before that, 2 other houses. Different degrees of... She stopped, found a cleaner word. Different arrangements. 7 years, Madame Kang said quietly. Yes. The old woman looked down at her champagne for a moment. When she looked up, something in her face had settled into a kind of hard, particular clarity. I want to invest in your work, directly, under your name. A proper launch, studio space, production budget, PR infrastructure, introductions to the right buyers. She paused. I've done this before with 2 other designers. Both of them are now showing in Paris. Amara's hands tightened on the railing. I don't make this offer lightly, Madame Kang continued. And I don't make it twice. I'm telling you this not to pressure you, but because I think you've spent enough years in situations where people withheld information to keep you uncertain. She looked at her directly. So, what's your first question? Amara breathed. There were about 15 questions lined up behind her sternum, but the first one out was the honest one. Why me? You've seen one gown. I've seen 7 years of work credited to 3 other people, Madame Kang said. My son is thorough when he investigates something. She glanced at Jun-Seo briefly, something almost warm in it. I've seen your portfolio, the real one, the one that doesn't exist anywhere with your name on it. Amara went very still. My son's people are also thorough, the old woman added simply. Jun-Seo said nothing. He was still looking at the river. Amara turned to face him. You pulled my work. He looked at her then. Sketches, pattern records, fitting notes, things that exist in studio archives with other people's signatures on them. A beat. Things that have a consistent hand behind them that doesn't match the hand of the person claiming them. That's... She stopped. Legal? He said. Mostly. Ethical? The corner of his mouth moved slightly. Arguably. You went through Veronique's files. I went through records that document work done in a studio my family has paid a significant amount of money to over the past 4 years. His voice stayed level. I wanted to understand what we were actually paying for. Amara turned back to the city. Her pulse was doing something she didn't entirely trust. She'd spent 7 years making herself small in professional spaces. Not invisible. She was never invisible. She was too tall and too black and too American for invisible in Seoul's fashion industry, no matter how much she'd tried to keep her head down. But small. Contained. Careful, the way Madame Kang had said. She'd learned to fold herself into the shape the job required, and she'd gotten good at it the way you get good at anything you practice every day for years. Standing on this terrace with these 2 people, she felt the edges of that shape pressing against something they couldn't contain. I have a contract, she said, with Veronique. 18 months remaining. Contracts can be addressed, Madame Kang said. She'll fight it. Let her. No hesitation, just that. Amara looked at the old woman. You don't know Veronique Choi. I know what she is, Madame Kang said. I've known women like her my entire life. Talented enough to build something, not talented enough to sustain it without taking from others. She paused. She'll fight until the fight costs more than it's worth. Then she'll stop. From inside the ballroom, the doors opened a few centimeters and a staff member appeared. He looked at Jun-Seo and gave a small, precise nod. Jun-Seo pushed off the railing. Your guests? Amara said. My mother's guests. He looked at her. Think about what she's offered. Not tonight. Tonight you've had enough thrown at you. But this week. Jun-Seo. Madame Kang's voice carried a specific note of maternal warning. I'm not pressuring her, he said. I'm giving her a timeline. He looked at Amara one more time. You can stay on the terrace as long as you want. or you can come back inside. Either way, a car will take you home whenever you're ready." He went back inside. Madame Kang stayed a moment longer. She looked out at Seoul, at her city, which it clearly was in some fundamental way, the way a city belongs to people who have survived it long enough. And then she looked at Amara. "The gown is the finest piece I've worn in 20 years, she said. "That's not flattery. I don't flatter people." She set her champagne glass on the railing. "Come inside when you're ready. I want to introduce you to some people." She went back inside. Amara stood on the terrace alone. The city burned below her. She stayed there for 6 minutes. She counted them. She went back in. The room hit her again. The sound, the light, the weight of all that assembled wealth and proximity to power. But it hit differently this time. She was still wearing jeans. People still noticed. But something had shifted in the geometry of the room, and she felt it immediately, the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather arrives. Madame Kang was standing near the center of the room with a cluster of people around her. 4, 5, 6 of them. The kind of people who stood in the center of rooms because that's where they naturally ended up. She saw Amara enter and did something deliberate. She raised her voice slightly and said, in the particular carrying tone of someone who has decades of practice being heard in crowded rooms, "Here she is, the woman responsible for this gown." The cluster turned. Amara walked toward them because she had no other option. She was introduced to people whose names she recognized from newspapers and from the kind of conversations that happened at industry events when people thought she wasn't paying attention. A deputy minister, the CEO of a cosmetics conglomerate, a woman who ran one of the 3 largest modeling agencies in Korea, a fashion editor whose opinion in this country worked like weather. You could plan around it or be destroyed by it, but you couldn't ignore it. Each one of them looked at Amara's outfit when they shook her hand. None of them said anything about it, which was its own kind of commentary. But Madame Kang kept talking about the gown, about the construction, about the specific qualities that set it apart. And the way she talked about it made something shift in each of those faces, one by one. The fashion editor, whose name was Park Sun-young, and who had the energy of someone who had seen every variety of industry hustle and was largely bored by all of them, looked at Amara with new attention. "The beadwork is yours?" "Yes." "The sourcing?" "Yes." "The line of the bodice? The way it doesn't compress at the waist, but still reads structured? That's a cut decision." "The seam placement?" Park Sun-young looked at her for a long moment. "What's your background?" "Design school in New York, then Korea for 7 years." "Where in Korea?" 3 houses. Most recently Maison Veronique." Something flickered across the editor's face. Not surprise, recognition, maybe. The particular recognition of someone who had suspected a thing for a while and just received confirmation. "Veronique Choi is very talented," the editor said. "Yes," Amara said. "She is." Park Sun-young looked at her steadily. "But not this talented." Amara said nothing. The editor nodded once and turned back to Madame Kang and said something that Amara didn't fully catch, but that made the CEO of the cosmetics company laugh and lean in closer. She was standing in that cluster, in her jeans, being talked about and talked to and considered, when she felt the shift in the room for the 3rd time that evening, different from the first 2, colder. She turned. Kang Seo-yeon was crossing the ballroom floor toward her. Seo-yeon was wearing a gown the color of old bone, ivory with a warm undertone, Valentino or something in that register, beautifully fitted. She was carrying a champagne flute, and she was smiling the smile of someone who had prepared it in advance. She stopped just outside the cluster, close enough to be included, far enough to be separate. "Amara." Warmth in the voice. Practiced warmth, the kind with a skeleton under it. "I'm so glad you made it." Amara looked at her. "Seo-yeon, I was worried when I didn't see you earlier." A small tilt of the head. "I hope the confusion about the dress code wasn't too stressful. I feel terrible, and I must have gotten the wrong information when I called you." The cluster had gone slightly quiet. Not obviously. Just the particular attention narrowing of people who sense a scene beginning. "You mentioned smart casual," Amara said. Her voice was completely flat. "Did I?" Seo-yeon's expression did something complicated. A little troubled, a little innocent. "I'm so sorry. I genuinely thought it was more relaxed this year. Aunt Hyerin changes things up sometimes. I should have checked before I called. Seo-yeon, Madame Kang's voice. 2 words, no inflection, the temperature of the room dropping a full degree with them. Seo-yeon turned to her aunt. The prepared smile held, but something behind it thinned. Come see me in the morning, Madame Kang said. Not a suggestion, not an invitation, just that. Seo-yeon's throat moved. Of course, Aunt Hyerin. Happy birthday. She lifted her glass in a small toast, then turned and walked back into the room, steady and controlled, not hurrying because she was too well trained to hurry. Amara watched her go. Park Sun-young beside her said quietly, She's been doing that to women this family finds interesting for about 10 years. You handled it better than most. I didn't handle anything, Amara said. I just stood there. That's what I mean, the editor said. Machik. Jun-Seo found her an hour later near the far wall, away from the cluster, standing with a glass of water she'd accepted from a passing tray because she needed something to do with her hands. The party had softened around her. Not warmly, exactly, but the specific attention she'd attracted when she walked in had redistributed itself to other targets. People had moved on. That was the mercy of rooms like this. They had short memories for individuals and long ones for narratives. He came and stood beside her without ceremony. Seo-yeon apologized, he said. She performed an apology, Amara said. A pause. Yes. What happens to her? That's between her and my mother. He looked out at the room, and between her and me, eventually. The quiet between them was a specific kind of quiet, not uncomfortable. More like 2 people who had each been in a lot of loud rooms and had independently reached the same conclusion about noise. The editor, Amara said. Park Sun-young. What about her? She said something to your mother after we spoke. What did she say? He considered not answering. She could see him consider it. Then, she said she'd been wondering for 2 years who was actually behind the work coming out of Maison Véronique. She said if you're starting something independent, she'd like an early conversation. Amara looked down at her water glass. That's one conversation, Jun-Seo said. There were 6 people standing in that cluster. All 6 of them have my mother's number. She'll be getting calls this week. He paused. She'll pass them to me and I'll pass them to you. You're very certain this is going to happen. I'm certain that talent in the right room with the right visibility produces a specific outcome. He looked at her sideways. I've watched it happen. I've also watched what happens to talent that stays in the wrong room too long. Something shifted in his voice. Not quite personal, but close. It gets used up. Amara was quiet. You're not used up, he said. But you're close. She turned to look at him fully. He met her eyes without flinching. He had the look of someone who was used to saying difficult, true things and had stopped apologizing for it. You don't know me, she said. No, he agreed, but I know the work. And the work is... He stopped, started again. The work is not the work of someone who should be invisible. The party moved around them. The string quartet had stopped and something else had started, something with more weight to it, and the room had shifted its posture accordingly. People looser now. Later in the evening, the formal structure softening at the edges. I need to think, Amara said. I know. I'm not going to make a decision about my career in a ballroom in jeans. I wouldn't trust you if you did, he said. She almost laughed. Almost. It stopped somewhere in her chest. The car is whenever you want it, he said. He stepped back, creating space. Thank you for staying. I almost didn't. I know that too, he said. Then he walked back into the party and was absorbed by it, and Amara stood by the far wall with her water glass and looked at the room and felt the evening settling into her bones with a weight that was going to take some time to sort through. So, she was at the studio by 8 Monday morning. She told herself she was going in early to work. She was not going in early to work. She was going in early because she needed to see the space, her station, her sketches on the wall, the gold silk on the work table, before she made any decisions. She needed to be inside the physical reality of her actual daily life and not the strange, pressurized atmosphere of Saturday night. Minji wasn't in yet. The other staff wouldn't arrive until 9. The studio was quiet and gray with early light and smelled like itself, fabric and coffee and the faint solvent chemical sharpness that she'd stopped noticing years ago. She sat at her station and looked at her hands. They were a craftsperson's hands. Calluses on the fingertips from hand sewing. A small scar on the inside of her right index finger from a rotary cutter, years old. Short nails kept that way for practical reasons. She thought about Madame Kang's offer. She thought about Park Sun-young's face when she said, "Not this talented." She thought about 7 years and about the way it felt to watch other people wear your name. She reached for the gold silk. She had a client appointment Wednesday. She needed to have this bodice finished by then. She needed to focus. She was 3 stitches into the first seam when the studio door opened. Veronique Choi was not supposed to be in the studio on Monday mornings. She worked from her apartment Monday mornings. This was known. This was relied upon. Veronique Choi walked into the studio at 8:12 in the morning in a cashmere coat and yesterday's eye makeup and the expression of someone who had not slept well. She looked at Amara. Amara looked back at her. Veronique was 44 and had a face that was striking rather than beautiful. High forehead, strong jaw, dark eyes that were currently doing something complicated. She was a small woman who moved through spaces like she was larger. She'd built Maison Veronique from a single rented room in Hongdae, and she knew how to work, and she genuinely understood proportion and color and the architecture of clothing. She was also someone who had spent 3 years putting her name on Amara's work. And standing in the same room with her this early on a Monday, that fact occupied a lot of the available space. "I heard you were at the Kang party Saturday," Veronique said. "Madame Kang invited me." "She invited the atelier." Veronique's jaw moved. "Not you specifically." Amara set down the gold silk. She turned her chair to face the room. "She invited me specifically. I can forward you the message." Veronique's expression shifted. Something moved through it. Surprise, then recalculation, then something that landed closer to alarm than she probably wanted to show. "Why would she invite you specifically?" "Because she wanted to." "Amara." Veronique's voice dropped. She came further into the room and stopped by the cutting table, keeping distance between them, and Amara recognized the blocking. She'd seen this before. Veronique positioning herself behind something solid when she felt a conversation going somewhere she hadn't prepared for. "What happened at that party?" "I met some people. I had a conversation with Madame Kang." "What kind of conversation?" "The kind where she spoke and I listened." Veronique's hands moved to the edge of the cutting table. Her fingers pressed down on it. "She's a Kang. Their family has fingers in half the business infrastructure of this city. If she's interested in the atelier..." "She's not interested in the atelier," Amara said. The room went quiet. Veronique looked at her. Amara held the look without blinking. Something was happening between them. The specific tension of a thing that had been unspoken for years beginning the very slow process of becoming spoken. "What did she say to you?" Veronique asked. Quieter now. "She made me an offer." The silence had weight. Veronique's knuckles were pale against the cutting table. "For you individually?" "Yes." Veronique let out a breath through her nose. She looked at the cutting table. She looked at the window. She looked at the sketches on the wall above Amara's station, and Amara watched her look at them, watched her face as she processed what she was seeing, and understood from the processing that Veronique had never actually looked at them before, had never asked, had simply not engaged with the question of what they were or whose they were, because engaging with that question would have required engaging with a larger one. "Those are yours," Veronique said. Not a question. "Yes." "They're good." "I know." Veronique looked at her. There was something in the woman's face that Amara had not seen there before. Something that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite anger. Something that lived between those two things. In the uncomfortable territory where people end up when they've been doing something they knew wasn't right and have just run out of room to keep not knowing it. "I can give you more credit," Veronique said. "Publicly. In the next collection materials. I can list you as lead designer. Co-designer. We can restructure how the work is attributed." "Will my name be on the work?" Amara asked. Veronique stopped. "Not co-designer. Not lead designer under the Maison Veronique label." Amara's voice was steady, steadier than she expected. "My name, on the work. Will Amara Brooks be the name on the garments I create?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. Amara counted them. She watched Veronique's face cycle through the answer before the woman said a word. She watched her almost say yes. She watched her stop. She watched her calculate what yes actually meant, what it cost, what it undid, what version of herself it required her to stop being. It's complicated, Veronique said. It's a yes or no question. The brand infrastructure, yes or no? Veronique looked at the cutting table. She looked at the window. She looked at her own hands on the table's edge. She didn't answer. The studio was very quiet. Outside, the street was beginning to wake up. A delivery truck, voices, the distant percussion of the city coming to life. Amara turned back to her work table. She picked up the gold silk. She set it down again. She thought about the emerald gown on the chair beside her bed and the finished version of it she'd seen so clearly in her mind. The version she'd carry out of this building on her own body, on her own terms, the first time she walked through a door as herself and not as anyone's head fitter. She thought about Madame Kang saying she'll fight until the fight costs more than it's worth. Then she'll stop. She thought about Park Sun-young saying, not this talented. She thought about Jun-Seo standing beside her at the railing saying the work is not the work of someone who should be invisible. And she thought about the silence that was still sitting in the room between her and the woman who had taken 7 years of her name and replaced it with another one. The answer was already decided. It had been decided for longer than she'd been willing to admit. She stood up. She reached for her kit bag, her coat on the hook beside the door. She felt Veronique watching her and didn't look at her yet, because she needed the next 30 seconds to make sure her face was doing what she wanted it to do. Not angry, not broken, not performing anything, just clear. She pulled on her coat. She picked up her bag. She looked at Veronique. "I'll have my formal resignation on your desk by end of day," she said. Veronique stared at her. "Amara?" 3 weeks' notice as per the contract. I'll complete the Wednesday appointment and the park fitting next week. After that, I'm done. You can't just... Veronique pushed off the table. You have 18 months remaining on your contract. You can't walk out of here and go work for whoever she... I'm not going to work for anyone, Amara said. I'm going to work for myself. The words landed in the studio like something she dropped from a height. Simple. Irrevocable. She walked to the door. The Kang family, Veronique said behind her, voice sharp now, the calculation fully visible. You think you understand what you're getting into? What his family is? What the people around him are? Amara stopped with her hand on the door. She didn't turn around. Madame Kang believes in my work, she said. That's what I'm getting into. She opened the door and walked out. The street hit her. Cold air, city noise. The ordinary bright Monday morning of Mapo-gu carrying on without any awareness of what had just happened on the second floor of a narrow building above it. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed. Her hands were shaking slightly inside her coat pockets. She pressed them flat against her thighs. She'd just resigned. She'd just resigned from the only job that had given her access to the level of work she was capable of, with no contract signed, no studio secured, no infrastructure in place, on the strength of an offer made on a terrace on Saturday night by a woman connected to one of the most powerful criminal families in Seoul. She had also, she realized, left the gold silk on her work table. The Wednesday appointment. She'd have to come back. She started walking. Her phone rang. She pulled it out expecting Veronique. It was a number she'd saved only once, 2 days ago. She picked up. I heard you were at the studio this morning, Jun-Seo said. No preamble. Your people move fast. Are you still there? I'm on the street. I just left. A pause. Something in it, not quite surprise, but the quality of someone recalibrating. What happened? I resigned. The pause this time was different, longer. You didn't have to do that today, he said. My mother's offer doesn't require... It wasn't about your mother's offer, Amara said. She turned a corner. The street opened up toward the river, and she could see the water from here, gray and flat and wide. She asked me if my name would be on my work, Amara said. She didn't answer. That was the answer. Silence on the line, then quietly. Where are you? Walking. I'll have someone... I don't need a car, she said. I need to walk. Another pause, then... Okay. She kept walking. There's something you need to know, he said. His voice had changed. Something in it had tightened slightly, The shift you hear when someone is deciding how much to tell you. Veronique Choi made a call this morning before you arrived at the studio, before you resigned. Amara stopped walking. Who did she call? A lawyer, he said, and then someone who works for a man who does not like my family very much. A beat. His name is Shin Dae-won. He runs competing interests in several of the same sectors as my family. He's been looking for leverage against the Kang name for about 2 years. The river was in front of her. Gray water, flat light, the city on both banks. Why would she call someone connected to him? Amara asked. Because, Jun-Seo said carefully, if Maison Veronique can establish that a Kang-backed entity recruited and extracted one of their contracted employees, they have a potential civil case. And if Shin Dae-won's people can use that case to tie my mother publicly to a contract dispute with a foreign national employee... He stopped. Amara understood. She felt the understanding move through her, cold and specific. They'd use me, she said, to come at your family. They'd try, he said, which means in about 48 hours, this stops being about a gown and a resignation and starts being about something considerably larger. A pause. I need you to understand what you just walked into. The wind off the river cut through her coat. She stood there on the embankment with Seoul spread out around her in every direction and her phone pressed to her ear and her hands finally, still. 7 years of invisible. And now this. Tell me what you need from me, she said. The line was quiet for a moment. I need you to trust me for the next 72 hours, Jun-Seo said. Can you do that? She looked at the river. She thought about the answer she wanted to give. She thought about the answer that was honest. I don't know you well enough to trust you, she said, but I trust what your mother said on that terrace. And I trust that whatever is about to happen, I'd rather face it knowing about it than the way I've been doing things for 7... The call dropped. Not signal loss. The kind of cut that has a different quality to it. Too clean, too sudden. Amara pulled the phone from her ear and looked at the screen. The call was gone. In its place was a text from a number she didn't recognize. No name, no context. 4 words. Go back to Chicago. She stared at the screen. The river moved behind her. The city noise continued around her. Her pulse had gone somewhere fast and tight, and she was aware of it in her throat, in her wrists, in the place between her shoulder blades where fear tends to land when it arrives without warning. She looked up. Across the embankment, maybe 30 meters away, a black car was parked facing her direction. Engine running. She couldn't see the driver through the tinted glass. It had not been there when she'd arrived. She looked at her phone again. Go back to Chicago. The car didn't move. She didn't move. The river kept going behind her, indifferent to everything, the way rivers are. And in the cold November morning of Seoul, she stood completely still and understood with absolute clarity that whatever door she'd stepped through when she walked out of that studio, it had just closed behind her. There was no going back. There was only whatever came next. The black car didn't move for 4 minutes. Amara counted. She stood on the embankment with the river behind her and her phone in her hand, and she counted the minutes the way she'd counted her breaths on the terrace Saturday night. Not because counting helped, but because it gave her mind something mechanical to do while the rest of her processed the situation. 4 minutes. Then the car pulled away from the curb, slow and deliberate, and merged into the morning traffic heading north along the Riverside Road, and was gone. She exhaled. She looked at the text again. Go back to Chicago. No punctuation, no signature. 4 words delivered with the particular confidence of someone who expected to be taken seriously. She took a screenshot. She didn't know why exactly. Habit, maybe. The instinct of someone who had learned to document things in environments where documentation was the only protection available. She sent the screenshot to Jun-Seo's number and then stood there waiting for the call to reconnect or a text back or anything. Nothing came for 3 minutes. Then, don't go home. Go to the address below, now. An address in Jongno-gu followed, a building she didn't recognize. She looked at the address. She looked at the river. She thought about the specific situation of a woman standing alone on a riverbank in a city that wasn't her city, having just resigned from her job, having just received a threat from an unknown number, being directed by a man she'd known for 4 days to go to an unfamiliar address. She pulled up a cab. The building in Jongno-gu was older than the neighborhood around it. A six-story structure that had survived several rounds of Seoul's aggressive urban renewal by being useful to the right people at the right times. The ground floor was a tea house that had been there since before Amara was born. The upper floors had no signage. A man was waiting at the side entrance. Mid-30s, compact, the particular stillness of someone paid to be positioned in doorways. He looked at her once and opened the door without speaking. She went in. The elevator opened on the fourth floor into a space that looked like a working office. Clean, functional, nothing decorative. Two people at desks with laptops. A wall of windows facing east, the morning light coming through hard and flat. Jun-Seo was standing by those windows with his jacket off and his phone in his hand and the look of someone who had been managing several problems simultaneously since before she'd woken up. He looked at her when she came in. His eyes did a fast inventory, checking for something, she realized, making sure she was okay. He did it quickly, and then he stopped doing it, the way you stop doing something when you don't want it noticed. "Sit down," he said. "I've been sitting in a cab." "Then stand." He turned back to the window. The text came from a number registered to a shell company connected to Shin Daewon's operations. "That took my people 11 minutes to trace, which means it wasn't designed to be hidden. It was designed to be found by us." He paused. "Which means it wasn't a threat to you. It was a message to me." Amara processed that. "He used me to send you a message. He used the situation. You were the situation." He turned from the window. "How much do you know about Shin Daewon?" "What everyone knows. Competing interests, rival family, wanted leverage against the Kangs. You mentioned him yesterday. What everyone knows is the surface." He crossed to the desk nearest the window and picked up a folder. He didn't open it yet. "Shin Daewon and my father were partners 22 years ago, before I took over the family's operations. They built the foundation of what both families control now, together." He paused. "Then my father discovered Shin had been moving money through their shared infrastructure in ways my father hadn't authorized, exposing operations, making them visible to people who should never have known they existed. What happened? My father ended the partnership." Jun-Seo's voice stayed flat. "Shin lost significant assets in the restructuring. He's been waiting for a way back in, or a way to damage us, since then." He set the folder down. 2 years ago, he started buying influence in the fashion and luxury sector, specifically targeting businesses that had Kang family investment or client relationships. Amara was very still. "Maison Veronique," she said. Jun-Seo looked at her. "He's been funding Veronique," Amara said. It wasn't a question. The understanding was arriving piece by piece, each one cold and specific. That's why she called someone connected to him this morning. She wasn't reaching out. She was reporting in. Jun-Seo was quiet for a moment. Then, "We believe Shin made contact with Veronique Choi approximately 14 months ago. At that point, Maison Veronique was facing a cash flow problem, expansion costs, a failed retail partnership. He offered private investment through an intermediary. She took it. And he's had access to the atelier since then. Access to its client list, its production records, its contracted staff." A pause. "Its relationship with the Kang family." The room was very quiet. The two people at the laptops had stopped typing. Amara looked at the window, at the hard, flat morning light. "He knew about me," she said. "He knew you were the actual creative force behind the work my family was paying Maison Veronique for." "Yes." Jun-Seo's jaw moved slightly. "We believe he's known for at least 6 months." And he waited. He waited until the situation produced something useful, until my mother invited you to the party, until I asked questions about the work. He stopped. "Until you became visible." She turned to look at him. He was looking back at her with the particular expression of someone delivering information they wish they didn't have to deliver. "He's going to use the contract dispute," she said. "He's going to try to do more than that." Jun-Seo came away from the desk and stood in the middle of the room. "If Veronique files against you for contract breach, Shin's lawyers can enter as interested parties, arguing that the breach damaged a business in which his investment vehicle has a stake. That gives him standing to conduct discovery into the Kang family's financial relationship with the atelier." He paused. "Discovery that could expose transactions my family would very much prefer stayed private. So I'm the door," Amara said. I'm how he gets in. You're the mechanism, yes, she breathed, one breath slow. Then I'll withdraw the resignation, she said. I'll go back. I'll finish the contract. You can't. Why? Because Veronique Choi is filing the breach claim regardless. His voice was direct. She filed the initial paperwork this morning, 40 minutes after you left the studio. He looked at her steadily. Withdrawing the resignation at this point doesn't stop the legal action. It just makes you appear unstable, which gives their lawyers more material. Amara stared at him. She filed before I'd even been gone an hour, she said. The paperwork was already prepared, Jun-Seo said, before you arrived at the studio this morning. The information landed somewhere deep and bad. Amara's hands found the back of a chair and pressed down on it. The wood was solid under her palms, and she needed that, needed the physical certainty of it. She knew I was coming in, Amara said. She was there at 8 in the morning because someone told her I was going to resign. Or she came in to provoke it, he said. Either way, the outcome was prepared for in advance. Who told her? How did she? She stopped. The answer moved through her like cold water. Min-ji. She said it without intending to. The name just surfaced. Jun-Seo's expression didn't change. That was its own answer. She's 24 years old, Amara said. Her voice had gone somewhere quiet and dangerous. She's been passing information about studio activity to an intermediary for approximately 3 months. We found the communication trail this morning. He paused. She probably doesn't know who she's ultimately reporting to. She likely thinks she's doing Veronique a favor, or she's being paid something small. Another pause. She's not the problem. She's a symptom. Amara let go of the chair. She walked to the window and stood in the hard morning light and looked out at Jongno-gu, the old streets, the traditional tea houses, the newer buildings pushing up through the older ones. She'd walked some of these streets in her first year in Seoul, when everything was still strange, and she was still capable of the specific kind of wonder that comes before a place becomes ordinary. She'd liked this part of the city then. She tried to remember what that felt like and couldn't. What do you need from me? She asked. She was aware of her own voice, flat, controlled, the voice she used when she'd moved past the emotion and into the place where thinking was possible. Tell me what the next 72 hours look like. I need you to stay away from the studio, away from Veronique, away from Min-ji, away from anyone connected to the atelier. He came to stand beside her at the window, not close, just adjacent. My legal team will respond to the breach claim. We have documentation of the pattern of work attribution, enough to counter the narrative she's trying to build. And Shin Dae-won? Shin is my problem. He used me as a message to you, Amara said. That makes him my problem too. Jun-Seo looked at her sideways. I'm not going to sit in a room and wait, she said. Tell me what's actually happening. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he made a decision. She could see him make it, the way you see someone step off a ledge they've been standing on. Shin is moving faster than we anticipated, he said. The message this morning wasn't just about you. It was timed. There's something else happening, something larger, and the contract dispute is meant to keep our attention divided. He paused. We don't know yet what the larger move is. But you know it's coming. We know it's already in motion. The light through this window was getting harder as the morning aged. Amara looked at her reflection in the glass. A tall woman in a coat, hands at her sides, face doing the flat controlled thing she'd taught it to do. She looked like someone who had their composure. She did not entirely feel like someone who had their composure. She thought about Min-ji, 24 years old with good eyes and a shy manner and the best natural sense of proportion Amara had seen in someone that young. 3 months of passing information to someone she probably didn't even know existed, probably thinking she was just keeping Veronique informed, probably not understanding what she was actually inside. Don't move against Min-ji, Amara said. I wasn't planning. I mean it. She didn't know what she was doing. Jun-Seo was quiet for a moment. All right. She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why she believed him. Something in the way he didn't argue. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A number she recognized. Kang Jun-Seo. She looked at Jun-Seo. He'd seen the screen. His expression went somewhere cold and still. Don't answer it. She answered it. Amara. Seo-yeon's voice was different from Saturday night. The practiced warmth was gone. What was underneath it was smoother and colder and considerably more honest. I think we should talk. We're talking. In person. There are things you don't understand about the situation you're currently in. Jun-Seo shook his head once. A small, precise movement. I understand it reasonably well, Amara said. You understand what Jun-Seo has told you, Seo-yeon said, which is one version. A pause. I have another version, and mine involves information about you specifically that you're going to want to hear before it becomes public. Amara's pulse did something involuntary. What information? Not on the phone. Seo-yeon's voice stayed smooth. There's a cafe in Insadong. I'll send you the address. 1 hour. The call ended. The room was quiet. Jun-Seo was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something that wasn't quite anger, more like the particular tension of someone trying very hard to stay measured about something they were not feeling measured about. Don't go, he said. She has something. She's working with Shin. I don't know that, Amara said. I do. Then come with me. That's not what you want, Amara said. I understand that. But she said she has information about me specifically. Not your family. Me. She looked at him. If there's something about me being used in whatever this is, I need to know what it is before your lawyers start making moves I don't have the context for. Jun-Seo pressed 2 fingers against his jaw. A private gesture, habit. She recognized the shape of it, the same thing she did with her own hands when she was pushing down a reaction. I'll have 2 people outside, he said finally. Fine. If she says anything about meeting again, about documents she wants you to sign, about any agreement, I'm not signing anything. If she asks you to leave the cafe, I'm not going anywhere with her. Amara picked up her bag. I'm going to sit across a table from her and listen. That's all. He looked at her. I've been listening to people in rooms my entire career, she said. I'm very good at knowing when someone is lying to me. And when they're not? She paused at that. That too, she said. The cafe in Insadong was the kind of place that had survived 20 years of neighborhood changes by serving very good tea to people who needed somewhere quiet to say difficult things. Small rooms, low ceilings, the particular hush of a space that had absorbed a lot of conversations. Seo-yeon was already there when Amara arrived, at a corner table away from the windows, both hands wrapped around a cup of something hot. She looked different. The polish was still in place, but it was sitting differently on her today, like clothing that had been worn too long. There were shadows under her eyes that her makeup wasn't fully covering. Amara sat down across from her. They looked at each other for a moment. You came alone, Seo-yeon said. I came without Jun-Seo, Amara said. That's not the same thing. Something moved across Seo-yeon's face. Almost respect. Almost. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, she said. You gave me no credit, Amara said. So that's not saying much. Seo-yeon absorbed that without flinching. She looked down at her cup. The cafe was quiet around them. 2 other tables occupied, nobody close. A staff member moved somewhere in the back. Shin Dae-won contacted me 6 months ago, Seo-yeon said. Amara didn't react. She kept her face neutral and her hands flat on the table. He knew about my situation with the family. Seo-yeon stopped, started again. My position in the family is not what it looks like from the outside. My mother was Hye-rin's sister. When she died, I was 18. Hye-rin took me in, educated me, gave me access to everything her family had. She looked up. But access isn't belonging. I've known that my entire life. Everyone in that house has known it. And Shin used that, Amar said. He offered me something. Seo-yeon's voice stayed level. Financial independence from the family. My own business infrastructure. He said all he needed was information about family movements, about Jun-Seo's business decisions, about the Kang investment portfolio. She paused. He said it wouldn't hurt anyone. They always say that. Seo-yeon looked at her with something that was almost a flinch. I know what I did. Do you? I passed him information for 4 months. She said it plainly, no decoration. Then he told me about you, about what he was planning to use you for, how the contract dispute would work, what discovery would expose about the family's finances. Her jaw tightened. He told me because he wanted me to understand that what he was building was bigger than I'd agreed to be part of. He was warning you, Amara said, showing you what you were inside. He was controlling me. Seo-yeon's voice dropped, making sure I understood that I was in far enough that I couldn't get out without... She stopped. Amara looked at her steadily. What do you have on me? The question came out clean and direct. Seo-yeon met her eyes. Shin had you investigated, she said, 3 months ago, when it became clear that Jun-Seo was looking into the work attribution at Maison Veronique. She reached into the bag beside her chair and produced a manila envelope, set it on the table between them. Your immigration status, a technical breach in your visa renewal from 2 years ago, a filing date discrepancy that was never flagged because no one looked for it. She paused. If Shin's people file a complaint with immigration enforcement citing the breach claim as evidence of unstable residency, they'd trigger a review, Amar said. Her voice was very quiet. And your current visa status would be frozen during the review period, Seo-yeon said. Weeks, possibly months, during which you couldn't legally work, couldn't enter into new contracts, couldn't launch a business, Amara said. The envelope sat on the table between them. Amara looked at it. She did not pick it up. 7 years of paperwork. 7 years of renewals and filing dates and the specific anxiety of being a foreign national in a country where the bureaucratic infrastructure was not built with her in mind and the margin for error was paper thin. She had been careful. She had been so careful. A filing date discrepancy. Something small. Something technical. Something that could be pulled out and used like a knife at exactly the wrong moment. Why are you telling me this? Amara asked. Seo-yeon looked at her cup, then at the table, then at Amara. Because I set you up Saturday night, she said, and you walked into that room anyway. And you stood there and you didn't fall apart and you didn't run and you didn't... She stopped, pressed her lips together. I wanted to humiliate you because I was afraid of what Jun-Seo paying attention to you meant for me, for my position. She looked up. That was small, and I knew it was small while I was doing it. The cafe was quiet. Someone at another table turned a page. Jun-Seo doesn't know about the immigration file, Seo-yeon said. Shin is holding it separately from the contract dispute. If the contract dispute doesn't produce what he needs, he uses this second. It's a backup. And you're telling me so I can tell him. I'm telling you so you can protect yourself. A pause. Whether you tell him is your decision. Amara looked at the envelope. She reached out and picked it up. Are you going to tell Shin you met with me? She asked. He'll know anyway. Seo-yeon's voice was very tired. He knows most things. What do you want from this? From coming here and telling me? Seo-yeon looked at her for a long moment. The shadows under her eyes. The makeup that wasn't covering them. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something heavy in a direction they knew was wrong and have finally, too late, put it down. Nothing, she said. I don't want anything from you. She wrapped both hands around her cup again. I want to stop being useful to a man like Shin Dae-won. I don't know how to do that from where I'm standing. She looked away. But I thought if you knew, if Jun-Seo knew, it might be less useful to him if someone else had the information first. Amara stood up. She held the envelope in both hands and looked down at Seo-yeon and thought about Saturday night. The ballroom, the whispers, the specific malice of the phone call, the word embarrassed. She also thought about a woman who had been 18 years old and alone and had spent the next 20 years being adjacent to a family that wasn't hers. She didn't forgive her. She didn't have enough information yet to know what she felt about her, but she understood her. That was something. Go to Madame Kang, Amar said. Not Jun-Seo, his mother. Tell her what you told me and tell her everything else. She paused. She already knows most of it. She's known people like Shin for 50 years, but she needs to hear it from you. A beat. You owe her that. Seo-yeon's throat moved. Her eyes dropped. She'll be furious, she said. Yes, Amara said. Probably. And then? Amara picked up her bag. I don't know, she said honestly, but it'll be the truth, which is more than either of us has been operating with. She walked out. The street hit her cold and immediate. She stood on the Insadong pavement with the envelope under her arm and the morning traffic moving past her, and she pulled out her phone. She called Jun-Seo. He picked up on the first ring. I have something, she said. Meet me. Where are you? In Sadong, outside a tea house. She looked up at the street sign, gave him the intersection. 10 minutes, he said. Jun-Seo. She stopped. Started again. The thing she has on me. The backup. It's an immigration issue. Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady it was, given what was happening behind it. A filing discrepancy from 2 years ago. Shin can file a complaint and freeze my work status during review. A pause on the line. Can he actually do that? She asked. Or is he bluffing? The pause lasted 2 seconds longer than she wanted it to. He can do it, Jun-Seo said. The cold went deeper. Okay, she said. Don't move. I'm coming. She stood on the pavement and held the envelope and watched the street. The ordinary Monday morning of Insadong moving around her. Tourists, shop owners, a couple arguing quietly beside a parked scooter, a child pulling at his mother's sleeve. Her phone buzzed. The unknown number again. She opened the text. You have until midnight tonight. Leave Seoul or we file in the morning. She read it twice. She thought about Chicago, about her mother's apartment in Pilsen and the dry cleaner on the corner and the card that was still in her kit bag. You were always meant for big things, baby. She thought about 7 years, about every piece of work that had gone out into the world wearing someone else's name, about the emerald gown unfinished on the chair beside her bed, and the gold silk on the work table she couldn't go back to, and the signature she had practiced in the margin of a cocktail napkin once, at 19 years old, in a design school studio in New York, at 2 in the morning when she was so tired her hand was shaking. Amara Brooks. She thought about how it had looked on the page. She thought about how she had covered it with her palm when someone walked past. A black car rounded the corner and pulled to the curb in front of her. Jun-Seo got out before it stopped fully moving. He walked straight to her. He looked at her face and then at the envelope, and then at her phone, and then back at her face. Tell me everything, he said. She looked at him. She looked at the city around her city, in the specific way that cities belong to people who've bled for them, who've given them years and youth and the best of their invisible work. She opened her mouth to speak, and that was when the second phone, the one in Jun-Seo's jacket, rang. He answered it, and she watched his face change, watched something move through it that she had not seen there before. Not fear, but the thing that lives just adjacent to fear in people who have trained themselves not to feel it directly. He lowered the phone. My mother, he said. His voice was completely flat. She's been taken. The street went very quiet around her. Shin? She asked. He looked at her. We need to move, was all he said. And everything, the envelope, the text, the immigration threat, the contract dispute, all of it, collapsed into a single point, a single fact, a single second in which Amara understood that the game she'd thought she was playing was not the game she was actually in, and that the only way through what was coming required her to be something she had never been asked to be before. Not a designer, not an employee, not invisible, something else entirely. The car moved fast through Jongno-gu, and Jun-Seo was on the phone the entire time, speaking Korean too fast and too clipped for Amara to follow all of it. His free hand pressed flat against the window like he needed to feel something solid. She sat beside him and said nothing. She understood that the most useful thing she could do in the next 3 minutes was not exist loudly. She caught fragments. A location, somewhere south of the river, a name repeated twice that she didn't recognize. And one phrase she understood completely, don't move yet, said with the specific authority of a man who knew what happened when people moved too fast without information. He ended the call. Where? She asked. Yeongdongpo. His voice was stripped down to function. A building Shin owns through 4 layers of shell companies. My mother was taken from her car 20 minutes ago. Her driver is in a hospital in Mapo. He paused. He's alive. How many people does Shin have with him? Jun-Seo looked at her sideways. Why? Because I want to understand what we're walking into. We're not walking into anything. Don't, she said, flat and clean. Don't tell me to stay somewhere. This started with me. Shin used me as the door. Your mother is inside because of a situation I was part of creating. She looked at him directly. Tell me what we're walking into. He held her gaze for 2 seconds. Then, Unknown number. The building has 3 occupied floors. His core people, 4, maybe 5, plus whatever he's hired for the day. Does he want to hurt her? He wants leverage. She's leverage. His jaw tightened. He won't hurt her until he's run out of other options. Then we don't give him other options, Amara said. He looked at her. I mean, we take them away before he uses them, she said. The immigration file, the contract dispute. If we neutralize those before he can deploy them, he has less to negotiate with. We have maybe 2 hours before his lawyers file both. Then tell me what you need from me and let's move. The car turned south. The building in Yongdeungpo was a converted commercial property, 7 stories of pale concrete that had housed a logistics company until 3 years ago and now housed whatever Shin Dai-won needed it to house. It sat at the end of a narrow service road behind a larger commercial street, surrounded by the kind of anonymous urban geography that made it easy to miss and easier to forget. They stopped 2 blocks away. 3 cars, Jun-Seo's people distributed between them, 7 individuals total, none of whom looked at Amara when she got out, but all of whom she was aware of in the specific way you become aware of people who carry themselves with operational precision. Jun-Seo stood beside the lead car and spoke with 2 of his people for 4 minutes. Amara stood slightly apart and looked at the building and held the manila envelope under her arm and thought. The immigration file was one problem. It was documentary, papers, records, a filing discrepancy that existed somewhere in a government database. Shin could submit it, but he couldn't manufacture it in real time. Whatever was in that file was already fixed. It couldn't get worse in the next 2 hours. The contract dispute was different. That was active, moving. If Veronique's lawyers filed this morning, it would be in the system by noon. She pulled out her phone. She called a number she hadn't called in 8 months. 3 rings. Then a voice, sleep-rough despite the hour. Her former professor at the design school, who had retired to Seoul 4 years ago to consult for an IP law firm that specialized in creative industry disputes. Professor Yoon, she said, it's Amara Brooks. I need 40 minutes of your time, right now. I know what I'm asking. A pause. Then, Amara? The voice cleared itself. What's happened? She told him. Not everything. The essential structure, the attribution pattern, the documentation she had access to, the breach claim filed that morning, the specific legal vulnerability she was facing. She talked fast and clean and didn't editorialize because Professor Yoon didn't need editorializing. He needed facts, and she gave him facts. He was quiet for a moment when she finished. You have the studio archive records? He asked. The pattern documentation Jun-Seo mentioned? His people have them. Get them to me digitally in the next 30 minutes. If the attribution pattern is as consistent as you're describing, we can file a counterclaim for intellectual property theft that puts Veronique's breach claim in the ground before it stands up. He paused. It won't be pretty for her. It doesn't need to be pretty, Amara said. No, he agreed. It needs to be fast. A beat. Send me the files. She ended the call and turned to find Jun-Seo 3 feet behind her, having clearly heard most of the conversation. She held out her hand. The archive documentation your people pulled, I need it sent to an attorney in the next 20 minutes. He looked at her hand, then at her face. Something moved through his expression. Brief, complicated, and genuinely unguarded in a way she hadn't seen on him before. He took out his own phone and made a call and said 3 words in Korean. Done, he said. It's going to him now. Okay. She put her phone in her coat pocket. Now tell me the plan. The plan had 2 parts. The first part was Jun-Seo's. A direct approach to the building using a point of access Shin didn't know his people had identified, through the loading bay on the east side that connected to a service corridor on the 2nd floor. His people went first, fast and quiet, and with the specific economy of movement that comes from training rather than improvisation. The second part was Amara's. She hadn't told Jun-Seo about the second part. While his team made their approach from the east, she walked around the building to the front entrance. The main door, the one with a security desk visible through the glass and 2 men standing near it who were clearly not building staff. She pushed through the door. Both men looked at her immediately. She kept walking. She had the manila envelope in her hand and she held it at the kind of angle that suggested it was important, and she was delivering it, and she had somewhere to be afterward. Delivery, she said. In Korean. Her Korean was functional and accented and usually made people do a small recalibration. The moment of processing that a Black American woman was speaking to them in their language. And she had learned over 7 years to use that recalibration the way you use any small window of opportunity. Document package for Mr. Shin. Time sensitive. I was told to deliver directly. The two men looked at each other. One of them moved toward her. Wait here, he said. I was told directly, she repeated. She let impatience into her voice. Not aggression, just the specific energy of someone who has a next appointment. This is legal documentation. If there's a delay in delivery and the filing deadline is missed, wait, he said again. She waited. She was aware of her pulse in a way she usually wasn't, not racing, just present, loud, making itself known. The man with the phone stepped away and spoke quietly. 15 seconds. Then he looked at her. What firm? She named Professor Yoon's firm without hesitating. It was a real firm, known in Seoul legal circles, known to people who dealt in the kind of business where legal coverage mattered. The man looked at her for another moment. He stepped aside and pointed to the elevator. 4th floor, he said. She walked to the elevator. She pressed 4. She watched the doors close. In the 30 seconds between floors, she sent Jun-Seo a text. Front, 4th floor, now. She put her phone away. The elevator opened. Bottom. The 4th floor was a single large open space that had probably been an open-plan office. Most of the furniture was gone. What remained was a conference table, several chairs, a bank of windows overlooking the service road below, and 3 men standing near those windows. Shin Dae-won was not what she'd built in her head. She'd built something. She hadn't meant to, but the brain does what it does with threats, assembles them into shapes it can process. She'd built someone large and explicitly menacing. What she got instead was a man in his mid-60s, slight, with silver hair and a face that had the composed, patient quality of someone who had been winning slow games for decades. He was wearing a good suit. He was holding a cup of coffee. He looked at her, and something in his face registered genuine surprise. Not fear, just the specific surprise of a man who is used to controlling his environment and has just found an element in it he didn't place there. Madame Kang was seated at the far end of the conference table. She was composed, upright. Her coat was slightly askew, a button misaligned that she would never normally allow. And that detail, that single detail of disorder on a woman who held herself like architecture, was the most frightening thing in the room. She looked at Amara, and something moved through her eyes. Not relief exactly. Something more complex. The particular expression of a woman reassessing something she thought she knew. The 2 men beside Shin moved immediately. One toward Amara, one toward a position that covered the elevator. Ms. Brooks, Shin said. His English was excellent, unaccented and precise, the kind developed over decades. This is unexpected. I have a document package for you. She set the manila envelope on the conference table. From Kang Jun-Seo. Shin looked at the envelope. He didn't move toward it. That's not from Jun-Seo, he said. No, she agreed. But you'd look at it before you decided that. A pause. What's in it? He asked. The immigration file your people pulled on me, she said, and a counterfiling that my attorney submitted 40 minutes ago to the Immigration Bureau, citing irregularities in the process by which that file was flagged. She kept her voice level. The counterfiling also names the intermediary who accessed my records and traces the access back to your investment vehicle's registered legal team. Shin's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the quality of his stillness. You're bluffing, he said. Call Professor Yoon's office, she said. He'll confirm the filing timestamp. The man beside Shin moved closer to her. She didn't step back. The contract dispute is also done, she said. Veronique's breach claim has been countered with an IP theft filing covering 7 years of undocumented creative attribution. The documentation is substantial. It predates your investment in the atelier, which means any attempt to claim damages through your investment stake requires you to first defend Veronique's appropriation of my intellectual property in court. She paused. Publicly. Shin looked at her. She looked back. Maison Veronique is a liability to you now, she said. Not an asset, and the immigration leverage is neutralized. A beat. Whatever you came into this morning with, you no longer have it. The room was very quiet. Madame Kang, at the far end of the table, made no sound. She sat with her hands folded and her coat slightly wrong and watched Shin Dae-won with the calm of someone who has been in rooms like this for 50 years and knows exactly how they end. Shin set down his coffee. "You're a fashion designer," he said. It wasn't quite contemptuous, more like a man confirming information he'd believed was settled. "Yes," she said. "You walked into this building alone." "I walked in through the front door," she said. "That's not the same as alone." The elevator behind her opened. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She could see it in Shin's face, the specific recalibration of a man who has just understood that the geometry of the room has changed. Jun-Seo's footsteps on the concrete floor behind her, and others. Shin looked past her. His jaw was tight. The two men beside him had gone still with the particular stillness of people receiving signals they were trained to read. "Mr. Shin?" Jun-Seo's voice came from behind her and slightly to the right. "My mother." A beat. Then the sound of a chair moving. Madame Kang stood, her footsteps slow and measured toward her son. Amara didn't move. She was still looking at Shin. He was looking at her. "This isn't over," he said, quietly, just to her. "I know," she said. "My problems with this family don't end because you made 2 phone calls. I know that too." She held his gaze. "But your timeline does. Whatever you were planning to accomplish today, you don't accomplish it today." She paused. "And tomorrow's a different conversation." Something moved through his face. She couldn't name it exactly. It lived somewhere between assessment and a very old, very cold anger. He looked at her the way people look at things they've underestimated and are deciding how to recategorize. Then he looked past her at Jun-Seo. "Your father would have handled this differently," Shin said. "Yes," Jun-Seo said from behind her. "He would have." Nothing else. Shin picked up his coffee. He looked at the window. He made a small gesture with one hand and his 2 men stepped back. Both of them, a coordinated retreat that said clearly this wasn't over, but today was done. "Get out of my building," Shin said. They left. On the street outside, in the cold November air of Yeongdeung-po, Madame Kang stopped walking and turned to look at Amara. Her coat was still slightly wrong, the misaligned button. She had not fixed it. "You walked in the front door," she said. "Yes?" "Alone." "I had a conversation to have," Amara said. "Some conversations need to be had directly." Madame Kang looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at her son. Something passed between them. Not words, not a gesture, just the particular communication of 2 people who know each other completely and have just witnessed the same thing and have reached the same conclusion about it. "The filings," the old woman said. "They're real?" "The counterclaim is real," Amara said. "Professor Yoon filed it. I'll send you the confirmation." "And the immigration counterfiling?" Amara paused for half a second. "It will be real by end of day." Madame Kang looked at her. "You bluffed him," she said. "I bluffed half of it," Amara said. "The IP counterclaim is real. The immigration filing I told him was 40 minutes old was actually 20 minutes from being filed," Jun-Seo said quietly, from beside her. She turned. He was looking at his phone. Professor Yoon extended the scope of the counterfiling to include the immigration record irregularities. He confirmed it 4 minutes ago. He looked up. "It's done now." Amara looked at him. "Your attorney works fast," he said. "He was always good under pressure," she said. Jun-Seo held her gaze. The cold morning air was around them, and behind him the pale concrete of Shin's building and the service road, and the anonymous Yeongdeung-po geography. His face was doing the controlled composure thing it did, but underneath it, in the specific way she'd started to learn to read him in 4 days, something else entirely. "You walked in the front door of that building," he said. Not quite the same tone as his mother, different. "Someone had to talk to him," she said. "My people were 30 seconds from the 4th floor. 30 seconds is a long time when the wrong thing gets said." "You didn't know what he'd do." "No," she agreed, "but I knew what I had, and I knew how to present it." She looked at him steadily. I've been presenting things in rooms my whole career. This wasn't that different. He looked at her for a long moment. It was extremely different, he said. The principle was the same, she said. He almost said something. She watched him almost say it. He stopped, put it somewhere, and looked away. Madame Kang had walked a few steps toward one of the cars and stopped, looking back at them both with the expression of a woman who had arrived at an opinion and was keeping it private. "We should leave this street," she said. They moved. In the car going north, Amara sat in the back with Madame Kang while Jun-Seo rode in the car ahead. On phone calls, she could see through the windshield. His profile, the movement of his mouth, one hand on the back of the headrest in front of him. Madame Kang was quiet for several minutes. She had fixed her button. She was looking out the window at the city. "The offer I made you Saturday," she said eventually. "Yes." "You still want it?" Not a question. Amara answered it anyway. "Yes." "After this morning." "After this morning more than before this morning," Amara said. The old woman turned to look at her. "Why?" Amara thought about it. Not about what to say, about what was actually true. "Because I spent 7 years making myself small enough to fit inside someone else's work, and today I walked into a room with my own name behind me, and it—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "It was the first time I've done that, in any room, in 7 years. She looked at the city going past. "I don't want to go back to the other way." Madame Kang was quiet. "He'll come back," she said. "Shin, this doesn't end him." "I know. The problems he created for you, legally, professionally, they're managed now, but they're not gone. There'll be more." She paused. "Are you prepared for that?" Amara thought about the emerald gown on the chair beside her bed, about the signature on a cocktail napkin at 19, about the sketch on a studio wall that nobody had ever asked about. "I've been preparing for it my entire career," she said. "I just didn't know what I was preparing for." Madame Kang nodded. Once, slowly. The car crossed the Han River, the bridge cables against the gray sky, the water below, flat and dark, going somewhere. "I'll have my people contact Professor Yoon this week," the old woman said. "The investment structure needs to be formalized before Shin can look for another angle." She looked at Amara directly. "We move fast. Studio space by the end of the month. Production budget released in stages. Your name on everything from day one." "My name on everything from day one," Amara said, not repeating it, confirming it. "Yes." Amara looked out at the river. She breathed. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jun-Seo's number, from the car 10 meters ahead of her. She opened it. "Are you okay?" She looked at the back of his head through 2 windshields and 10 meters of bridge. She typed back, "Ask me again tomorrow." A pause. Then, "I will." The bridge ended. Seoul opened up around them on the north bank. The city in its full Monday morning chaos, unaware and indifferent, carrying on the way it always did, the way cities do, with no particular concern for the individual lives resolving and breaking and beginning again inside it. Amara put her phone in her pocket. She was not okay exactly. Her hands were still doing the faint tremor thing they'd been doing since the 4th floor of that building. Her chest was tight in a way that was going to take several hours to loosen. There was an adrenaline debt collecting somewhere in her body that she'd have to pay later, alone, in her apartment, probably at a strange hour of the night. But she was here. She was in a car going north across the river in the city she'd given 7 years of her invisible best work to. And her name was on 2 legal filings and about to be on a studio and eventually on garments that would hang in the right rooms and carry the right weight and belong entirely, without asterisk or footnote, to the person who made them. Shin Dae-won's voice came back to her. This isn't over. She knew it wasn't over. But the thing she'd been waiting for, the thing she hadn't let herself name until today, standing on a 4th floor with a bluff in one hand and a real filing in the other, was over. The waiting was over. The smallness was over. The business of living inside someone else's shadow and calling it a career was done. Whatever came next, it would come at her directly, and she would meet it with her name on it. The car turned off the bridge and into the streets of Mapogu, and the city closed around her, familiar and indifferent and full of the particular promise of places that don't care whether you make it. They just keep going either way, and you have to decide whether you're going with them or letting them carry you. She decided. She'd already decided, standing in a studio in the early, cold Monday morning, looking at the silence where an answer should have been. She just hadn't known yet how far that decision would take her before the day was done. Now she knew. And ahead of her, in the car 10 meters north, Kang Jun-Seo was still on his phone, still managing the fallout, still doing the precise, careful work of a man who had spent his whole life protecting what mattered to him. And somewhere in the last 4 days, without either of them particularly planning it, she had become something he was trying to protect. She looked at the back of his head. She thought about what that meant. She thought about the question she hadn't answered yet. The real one. Not, "Are you okay?" but the larger thing underneath it. The thing that had been building since a corridor in Seongbuk-dong and a pair of eyes that saw through every careful answer she'd ever prepared. She wasn't ready to answer it today. But she was, for the first time in a very long time, willing to let the question exist. That was something. That was, in fact, quite a lot. The car stopped at a light. Outside, Seoul kept moving. Inside, Amara Brooks sat in the back seat of a car belonging to a family she'd met 4 days ago, holding the wreckage and the beginning of the same morning in both hands, and waited for what came next. 3 weeks passed before Shin Dae-won made his next move. Amara had expected faster. She'd been braced for it, waking up in the mornings with the particular alertness of someone who has learned that quiet doesn't mean safe, it just means the thing hasn't arrived yet. She'd gone through the motions of those 3 weeks carefully, meeting with Professor Yoon twice, signing the preliminary investment agreement with Madam Kang's legal team, beginning the paperwork for the studio space in Yongsan that Jun-Seo's people had identified, a third-floor unit in a converted building with good north light and enough floor space for 3 workstations and a cutting room. She'd also finished the emerald gown. She'd done it the night after Yong Deungpo, sitting on her apartment floor with the fabric spread around her and her hands shaking in the first hour, and steady by the third, working through the night the way she'd always worked through the hard things, with her hands, with the specific comfort of cloth and thread, and the problems that had solutions if you were patient enough to find them. The gown was hanging on the back of her bedroom door. She hadn't worn it yet. She was waiting for the right occasion without letting herself think too carefully about what that occasion would be. The call from Professor Yoon came on a Thursday morning in late November. "Shin filed," he said. "Not the immigration angle. That's neutralized, and he knows it." He went a different direction. A pause. "He's filed a defamation claim against you personally, alleging that your IP counterclaim against Veronique contained false statements of fact that damaged the reputation of his investment vehicle." Amara sat down on the edge of her bed. "Can he win that?" she asked. "No," Professor Yoon said, "but winning isn't the point. The point is cost. Discovery will take months. Legal fees will accumulate. It's designed to drain resources before your studio launch." Another pause. "It's a pressure campaign. He's betting you'll settle." She looked at the emerald gown on the back of her door. "What's the counter strategy?" she asked. "We answer it aggressively and immediately. Full documentation response, no settlement overture, no indication we're feeling the pressure." He paused. "It'll be expensive." "How expensive?" He told her. She breathed through it. "Do it," she said. She told Jun-Seo that evening. They were in the Yongsan studio space, her studio space, empty still except for a folding table and 2 chairs and the particular smell of a freshly renovated room, paint, and concrete and possibility. She'd been coming here in the evenings to think, which was something she hadn't been able to do in the Mapon studio because everything there had belonged to someone else, and she'd always felt it. He listened without interrupting. He was leaning against the wall by the window, arms crossed, looking at the floor while she talked. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I'll cover the legal costs," he said. "No." He looked up. "I mean it," she said. "The investment agreement covers the studio infrastructure. Legal costs for my personal defense are mine." She held his gaze. "If I let you pay for everything that comes at me because of my connection to your family, I'm not running my own business. I'm running your family's investment." A beat. "That's not what either of us agreed to." He looked at her for a long moment. The empty room around them, the north light going gray-blue in the late afternoon. "You can't afford it alone," he said. "I know that." She sat down on the edge of the folding table. "I have some savings. I'll use them. And if it runs over, I'll ask you for a loan at a documented interest rate that I'll repay." She paused. "Not a gift. A loan." That's what I need it to be, she said. He pressed his lips together. He looked at the ceiling. He made the small gesture she'd come to recognize. 2 fingers against his jaw, the thing he did when he was pushing down a reaction he'd decided not to voice. All right, he said. Thank you. You're very difficult, he said. I've been told, she said. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile and was warmer than anything she'd seen there in the 4 weeks she'd known him. What? The defamation case dragged through December. Shin's lawyers were good, methodical and patient and willing to file motions that existed purely to generate paperwork and consume time. Professor Yoon's team was better. By the 2nd week of December, the documentation response was so thorough and so damaging to Shin's stated position that his lawyers stopped filing new motions and went quiet. The quiet this time was different from the earlier quiet. It had a different texture, not preparatory, more like the sound of a calculation being revised. On the 14th of December, Veronique Choi called. Amara was in the Yongsan studio. She had workstations now, 3 of them, assembled and positioned, the cutting table bolted down, the lighting installed. Minji was sitting at one of the workstations because Amara had called her 2 weeks after Yongdong-po and asked her directly, calmly, with no accusation in her voice, whether she understood what she'd been part of and whether she wanted to do something different with her considerable talent. Minji had cried for about 8 minutes and then said yes. She was 24 years old and she'd made a mistake and she knew it and she was going to have to live with it, but she had the best eye for proportion Amara had seen in someone that young. And Amara was not in the business of wasting talent on moral accounting when the accounting had already been done. She stepped out of the studio to take the call. Veronique, she said. Amara. A pause. The particular pause of someone who has rehearsed a conversation and found at the moment of beginning it that the rehearsal wasn't sufficient. I'm dropping the breach claim. Amara leaned against the wall in the corridor outside the studio and looked at the ceiling. Okay, she said. My lawyers advised. Veronique stopped. Started again. The IP counterclaim documentation, it's another stop. The sound of someone who is prepared to say something difficult and is discovering that difficult things resist preparation. It's comprehensive. Yes, Amara said. 7 years, Veronique said. Her voice had gone somewhere quieter. The professional smoothness had eroded down to something more honest underneath it. I knew what I was doing. I want you to know that I knew. The corridor was silent. Through the studio door, Amara could hear Minji's scissors, the soft, precise rhythm of good cutting work. She thought about what to say to that. She thought about whether she wanted to say anything to that. Why are you telling me? She asked. Because I want... Veronique stopped for a long time. I don't know what I want. I think I wanted to say it to someone who deserved to hear it. A pause. You deserved to hear it years ago. Yes, Amara said. I did. The line was quiet. I hope the studio goes well, Veronique said. I mean that. Amara considered whether she meant it back. She found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she did. Not warmly, not forgivingly, but in the flat, honest way you can wish someone well when you've moved far enough past them, that the emotion has mostly become just information. Take care of yourself, Amara said. She ended the call. She stood in the corridor for a moment. She put her phone in her pocket. She went back into the studio and sat down at her workstation and picked up the sketch she'd been working on and looked at it with fresh eyes and found, to her quiet satisfaction, that it was good. Shin Dae-won withdrew the defamation claim on the 22nd of December. No statement, no explanation. The claim simply disappeared from the filing system, withdrawn by his legal team on a Tuesday afternoon while Seoul was busy with the particular festive indifference of a city that doesn't slow down for anything. Professor Yoon called to confirm it. He sounded, for the first time in Amara's experience of him, genuinely pleased. He ran the numbers, Professor Yoon said, the cost of continuing against what he'd gain. He's a practical man when the arithmetic is clear enough. Is he done? Amara asked. With this avenue, yes. With your connection to the Kang family broadly? A pause. That's a longer question. But not today's question. Not today's question, he agreed. She thanked him. She ended the call. She went to the window of the Yongsan studio and looked out at the city in the early winter dark. the lights coming on across Yongsan, the Han River visible in the distance, the particular blue-black of a Seoul evening in December. Her studio, her window, her view. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass for a moment, briefly, the way you touch something you want to make sure is real. It was real. Yeah. Madame Kang called her on Christmas Eve. Not to discuss business. The old woman called to ask how she was sleeping, which was a question nobody had asked Amara in some time, and the specificity of it, not how are things going or how is the launch preparation, but how are you sleeping, made something in her chest do a slow, complicated thing. Better, Amara said, than I was. Good. A pause. The gala in February. I want you there. Not as a designer associated with my family's investment. As a guest. Another pause. There's a difference. I know the difference, Amara said. I know you know, Madame Kang said. I'm saying it anyway because some things should be said out loud. A brief pause. Jun-Seo will be there. I assumed. He asks about the studio more than business requires, the old woman said. Very dry, very even. Amara looked at the emerald gown on the back of her bedroom door. Tell him the studio is progressing well, she said. Tell him yourself, Madame Kang said, and ended the call. He showed up at the studio 3 days later. No message, no call ahead, just a knock on the studio door at 4:30 on a Thursday afternoon. Minji answered it, looked back at Amara with an expression carefully emptied of anything useful, and stepped out to give them the room. Jun-Seo stood in the doorway of Amara's studio and looked at what she'd built. She watched him look at it. The 3 workstations, the cutting table, the bolts of fabric along the east wall, a deep terracotta silk, a black wool crepe, the beginning of a midnight blue she hadn't named yet. The sketches pinned above each station, filling the wall to the ceiling. Her sketches. Her name in the corner of every one of them. He looked at it all for a long time. Then he looked at her. It's good, he said. I know, she said. He came into the room. He stood by the cutting table and looked at the sketch she'd been working on. A coat, asymmetric closure, structured shoulders that tapered into something unexpected at the hem. He looked at it for a moment. This is new, he said. Everything here is new, she said. That's the point. He looked up from the sketch. She was standing on the other side of the cutting table, and the late afternoon light was coming from the north windows, and the studio smelled like fabric and fresh paint, and the particular clean air of a space that was only beginning to accumulate its history. My mother's gala, he said. February, she said. Yes. He paused. I thought maybe before February we could... He stopped. The composed precision that was usually his operating mode had developed a small fault line. She recognized it because she'd seen it on the bridge at Yongdongpo when he'd looked at her in the car with his mother. I thought we could have dinner. We've had dinner, she said. We've been in the same locations where food was present, he said. That's not the same thing. She looked at him across the cutting table. The sketch between them. Outside, the December city getting dark early and fast. I'm not easy to know, she said. It came out plainly. Not a warning exactly. Just true. I'm aware, he said. I don't trust quickly. I know that too. And your family's situation is... She stopped. Found the honest version. It's complicated, for me. For what I'm trying to build. She pressed her hands flat on the cutting table. I need what I'm building to be mine. Fully mine. Not something that exists in the shadow of a relationship with your family. Yes, he said simply. That means if something... She stopped again, started more carefully. If something develops between us, it can't compromise that. It can't become another arrangement where someone else's name ends up in front of mine. I would never... I know you wouldn't mean to, she said. That's not the same as it not happening. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her across the cutting table with the particular attention she'd first noticed in a corridor in Seongbuk-dong 4 weeks ago. The attention that didn't look away, didn't recalibrate, just stayed. What do you need from me? He asked. To trust that this is different. She thought about the question. She took it seriously the way it deserved to be taken seriously. Time, she said, and for you to not try to solve things for me that I haven't asked you to solve. I can do that, he said. The second one will be harder than the first. I know, she said, but I can do it. She looked at him. She thought about the bridge in Yeongdongpo and the terrace in Seongbuk-dong and a fourth-floor room in a pale concrete building where she'd stood with a bluff in her hand and felt, for the first time in 7 years, like she was standing on her own ground. She thought about the fact that he'd been 10 meters behind her on that bridge and 30 seconds away on that fourth floor and had not either time tried to get there first. Saturday, she said. Dinner. Something happened in his face. Brief, genuine. The kind of thing you see when someone has been patient for long enough that the patience pays off, and they don't know quite what to do with the payoff. Saturday, he said. The launch was in March. Not a grand event. Amara had decided against grand, not because she couldn't do grand, but because she didn't want her first public moment to be about spectacle. She wanted it to be about the work. A small showing in the Yongsan studio, 30 invited guests, 6 pieces from the first collection displayed on forms in the North Light. The 6 pieces included the emerald gown. She wore it that evening. She'd finished it in November and it had been hanging on the back of her door for 4 months, waiting for her to be ready for it. And standing in her studio bathroom getting dressed on the night of the launch, she finally was. It fit the way she'd designed it to fit. Not perfectly, because she'd made it before she knew exactly what the next 4 months would do to her body, to her posture, to the way she held herself when she walked into a room. She'd taken it in at the waist the week before, a small adjustment, and now it was right. She looked at herself in the mirror, a woman in an emerald gown she'd made with her own hands, in a city she'd given 7 years of invisible work to, on the night she finally stopped being invisible. She looked like herself. That was the thing. She looked exactly like herself. Park Sun-young was the first to arrive. The fashion editor came in with 2 colleagues and walked directly to the 6 displayed pieces and stood in front of each one for a long time without speaking, the way she'd looked at Madame Kang's gown in the fitting room of the Kang estate. Then she turned to Amara and said, "The coat. Tell me about the coat," Amara told her. The asymmetric closure, the structural logic of the shoulder, the hem decision, and why she'd made it. She talked the way she'd talked to Madame Kang in the fitting room 4 months ago. Directly, technically, without performing enthusiasm, because the work was the enthusiasm. Park Sun-young listened. When Amara finished, the editor looked at the coat for another moment. "I'm doing a feature in the March issue," she said. "New independent labels. I'd like to include this." She paused. "Full page? Your name? Your work? Your story?" "My story," Amara said. "The real one," Park Sun-young said. "Not a press release version." She looked at Amara. "People deserve to know whose hands made these things." Amara thought about that, about the weight of it. 7 years of hands that nobody knew about, and now a full page in a magazine saying the name. "Otzi." "Yes," she said. "All right." The room filled slowly. Madame Kang arrived with 2 women whose names Amara recognized from the introduction at the birthday gala. The CEO of the cosmetics company came with his wife, who looked at the emerald gown for a long time and asked quietly if it was available for commission. Seo Yeon came. She came alone near the end of the evening when the room had thinned out a little, and she stood in the doorway for a moment before coming in. She was wearing something simple, not trying, not performing. She looked like a person who had spent the past 3 months in some private reckoning and had come out of it carrying something she hadn't carried in. She stopped in front of the midnight blue piece, the one Amara had named last, the one she'd finished the week before the launch, the color she'd finally settled on calling Han River in November. "This one," So-yeon said quietly, not to Amara specifically, just to the room. Amara came to stand beside her. They looked at the piece together for a moment. "Did you go to Madame Kang?" Amara asked. "The day after Yeongdongpo," So-yeon said. "Yes." "How was it?" "Exactly as terrible as I expected." A pause. "And then she made tea, and we talked for 2 hours. Seo-yeon's voice was measured and very quiet. "She's known about Shin for longer than I told her. She knew most of what I'd done. She just needed to hear me say it. And now?" Seo-yeon looked at the midnight blue. "And now I'm still in the house. Still not family, not really, but..." She stopped, found words. She said belonging isn't given, it's built. A pause. I think she was talking about me. I think she was also talking about you. Amara looked at the dress, at the Han River color she'd chosen because it was honest, because it didn't try to be more beautiful than it was, just held its particular truth in the light. I'm sorry, Seo-yeon said. For the phone call. For the party. I know, Amara said. That's all I wanted to say. I know that too. They stood there for another moment in the comfortable, slightly uncomfortable way of two people who are not friends and may not become friends, but have been through something together that requires a different category. Then Seo-yeon said, The Midnight Blue, can I commission it? Amara looked at her. I'll put you on the list, she said. Jun-Seo arrived late, which she'd expected, and stayed after everyone else had gone, which she'd also expected. He stood in the middle of the empty studio after the last guest left, looking at the 6 pieces in the north light. She was at the work table behind him, straightening things, winding down the way you wind down after an evening that has taken everything you had and returned it with interest. Well, she said. He turned to look at her across the studio. Well, he said, that's not an answer. It's everything, he said simply. The work is everything. He paused. You know that already. I do, she said. I want to hear it. He walked toward her. He stopped on the other side of the work table. The same geometry as the cutting table the week before, the same north light going dark now into evening, the same sketch between them that had become 6 finished pieces hanging in the room. The coat, he said. Park Sun-young is going to write about the coat. She told me. It'll change things. I know. Fast, he said. Faster than you might be ready for. I've been getting ready for 7 years, she said. I think I'm ready. He looked at her for a long moment. The emerald gown, he said. What about it? You made it for yourself. Yes. Before any of this, before my mother's offer, before Yongdongpo. He paused. You were already making something for yourself. She looked at him, the question behind the observation. I'd been making things for myself my whole career, she said. I just kept giving them away. She pressed her hands flat on the work table. I stopped giving them away. He looked at her hands on the table, then at her face. I have something for you, he said. He reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the work table between them. Small. Flat. A photograph printed on good paper. She looked at it. It was a photograph of a cocktail napkin. On the napkin, in faded ink, was a sketch. Rough. Immediate. The quick, confident line of someone who draws the way they think. A gown, asymmetric at the hem. And in the corner, in handwriting she recognized as her own. Amara Brooks. She stared at it. Where did you get this? She asked. Her voice had gone somewhere quiet. The cafe in Hongdae, he said. Where you drew the initial sketch for my mother's gown. The owner keeps things left behind. My people found it when we were documenting the attribution timeline. He paused. It's been in that cafe for 11 weeks, sitting in a drawer. She looked at the photograph, at the sketch, at the signature she'd written at 19 in a design school studio and covered with her palm and had been covering in one form or another for every year since. Amara Brooks, her name, her handwriting, her gown, the one that had ended up on Madame Kang's shoulders in a ballroom full of Seoul's most powerful people, the one that had started everything that followed, the one that had been out in the world doing its work without her name attached to it. The original was still in a cafe drawer somewhere, but here it was anyway, the beginning of it. She picked up the photograph. Thank you, she said. He nodded. She held the photograph in both hands and looked at it for a moment longer. Then she crossed the studio to the wall above her primary workstation and found the pushpin she kept there, and she pinned the photograph at the center of the wall, above the sketches, above the work, at the highest point she could reach. She stepped back. There it was. The beginning, above everything that had come from it. She stood in her studio in her emerald gown and looked at her own name in her own handwriting pinned above her own work, and felt something move through her that didn't have a clean word in any language she spoke. Not joy exactly, not relief exactly, not triumph. Something larger and quieter than all of those. The specific feeling of arriving somewhere after a very long journey and finding that the place is real and that you earned it and that nobody can take it from you. Jun-Seo was beside her. Not close, just present. The way he'd been present on a terrace overlooking Seoul on a November night that felt like much longer ago than 4 months. "What's next?" he asked. She looked at the sketch, at the name. "The Coat," she said. Park Sun-young's article, the second collection. She paused. "And Shin will try something else eventually, and there'll be other things, other problems, other rooms to walk into." She looked at the photograph. "But they'll come at Amara Brooks, not at whoever Amara Brooks works for." She paused. "That's different." "Yes," he said. "It is." The studio was quiet. Through the north windows, Seoul blazed in its ordinary, extraordinary way. The lights of the Han River banks, the bridges pulling the two halves of the city together, the endless upward pressure of a place that doesn't stop building itself. Amara looked at it. She had come here 7 years ago with a partial scholarship and a portfolio her professors called technically exceptional and a hunger she hadn't known yet how to feed correctly. She had given this city the best of her invisible work. She had been used and overlooked and managed and underestimated, and she had survived all of it. Not gracefully, not without cost, not without the specific damage that accumulates in a person who has spent years being told by the structure around them that their name doesn't matter. But she was still here. She was standing in her own room, in her own city, wearing her own work, with her own name on the wall. That was the whole story, in the end. Not the gown, not the Kangs, not Shindai Wan or Veronique Choi or the filing dates and legal counters and ballroom whispers. All of that had happened, and all of it had mattered, and none of it was the actual story. The actual story was the signature, the one she'd written at 19 and hidden, and had spent 7 years working toward the courage to stop hiding. She'd found the courage. The rest was just work, the good kind. Jun-Seo's hand found hers on the work table. Not dramatic, not a gesture, just his hand settling next to hers, and then around hers, with the quiet certainty of someone who had decided something and was done deliberating. She let him. Outside, Seoul kept going. The river kept moving. The lights held against the dark the way lights do. Not permanently, not without effort, just stubbornly, one by one, refusing to go out. Inside, a woman who had spent 7 years living in someone else's shadow stood in the light of her own making and looked at her name on the wall and understood, finally, completely, with her whole body and not just her mind, that she had always been this, that the shadow had never been the truth of her, that the truth had been here all along, in the work, in the hands, in the name she had practiced writing since she was 19 years old, in a room where nobody was watching. She had always known who she was. She had finally stopped letting the world convince her otherwise. Amara Brooks. No hidden credits, no borrowed recognition, no one standing in front of her name, just the work and the woman who made it, and the city that would now, finally, irreversibly, know the difference.